Abyssal Murmurs. Hello, everyone. As we know in life, there are true stories that seem impossible and strange to us. Today, I will tell you thrilling, haunting, and horrifying stories. Let's get started. Story 1, Finding Mike. This story isn't mine, it's my aunt's. I'm going to tell it from her perspective. My husband, who I'll call Mike, and I had been dating for 4 years before finally deciding to tie the knot. Ours was a long-distance relationship, and the wedding was at his house, filled with family members who had helped make the day perfect. After the celebration, we finally got to bed around 1 a.m., exhausted. Mike was out cold within minutes. I was just about to drift off too, when I noticed something strange. From the corner of my eye, I saw a white figure floating toward me from the door. It was upright, but its feet weren't touching the ground. As it got closer, I could make out its face. It was a woman. Her eyes were pitch black, and her tongue hung unnaturally from her open mouth. My body froze in terror. I tried shaking Mike awake, but he wouldn't respond, no matter how hard I tried. Before I could react, the figure was right on top of me, her tongue almost brushing my face. I squeezed my eyes shut, terrified. Then, in a voice that wasn't spoken aloud but echoed in my mind, she demanded to know why I was in her bed and accused me of being with her man, Mike. The fear was overwhelming, but I gathered enough courage to tell her that Mike was my husband. In an instant, I felt a violent shove, and I was thrown from the bed. I sat there on the floor, stunned, unable to comprehend what had just happened. I think I stayed frozen there for what felt like forever. Eventually, I turned on the lights and tried waking Mike again, but he was too drunk to notice anything. I spent the rest of the night with the lights on, watching TV until I finally fell asleep. But even sleep offered no escape. In my dreams, she appeared again, this time as a beautiful woman. She warned me, coldly, to stay away from Mike. The next morning, I told Mike what had happened, fully expecting him to think I was crazy. But to my shock, he admitted that he knew exactly who I had seen. The woman had been haunting him for 2 years. Every night, she would appear and lie beside him. He had hoped that by getting married, she would finally leave him alone. I was furious. We had been together for 4 years, and not once did he mention that he was being haunted by some ghost woman. That day, Mike's uncle came over and tied a red string around both our wrists. He handed us a Gerber baby bottle and instructed us to place it under our bed to keep the spirit hidden from us. That night, we both felt her presence in the room, but she couldn't show herself like she had before. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and my arms tingled with fear, but at least we couldn't see her. She visited me in my dreams again that night, asking if I knew where Mike was. I told her I had no idea who she was looking for, but this was my bed now, and she needed to leave. She vanished, filled with rage. Over the next few months, we could still feel her presence occasionally, but she never harmed us or appeared like she did that first night. 9 months later, while we were visiting my parents out of state, Mike's cousins stayed at the house. They all claimed to have had the same dream, a beautiful woman asking them where she could find Mike. We no longer live in that house. We gave it to Mike's parents. To this day, anyone who sleeps downstairs says they are visited by her, sometimes as a beautiful woman, and sometimes as something much more horrifying. I had heard stories of spirits attaching themselves to people, but I never believed in them. Until it happened to me. In some cases, a simple red string or following instructions from a shaman or Buddhist monk can help. But if you fail to follow the rules or take the situation lightly, The spirit will come back, and when it does, it won't be so easy to make it leave. Story 2. Here's a story I found on an app that I thought was very interesting. I have been an avid swimmer and diver ever since I was in my late teens. As I got into various jobs out of high school, I never lost my enthusiasm for diving. So, when I had an opportunity to apply for a law enforcement-related diving job, I jumped for it. Not a lot of people are interested in a job that involves feeling around at the bottom of muddy lakes and streams for dead bodies. But I figured if it involved diving, I may as well put my hobby to good use. In the diving academy, where I had to go, no matter how much experience I had, they taught us techniques for how to find things you're searching for underwater. It's not always bodies, you understand. Sometimes it's guns, or stolen property, or cars. They taught us about currents, and eddies, and all those things that can affect where something will end up underwater. One of the trainees asked a question one day, while we were preparing to get into our diving pool. He asked the instructor if it wasn't creepy underwater, with zero visibility, touching everything to see if it's a dead corpse. The instructor seemed a little amused, and yet he had a strange look on his face. "You don't know the half of it," he said. "We're dealing with people's fathers and brothers and sons down there. And we are always respectful and do our jobs with professionalism. When you're out there on the job, no matter what happens, you be just that, respectful and professional." The way he said it was odd, like there was something he wanted to get across to us, but wasn't going to come right out and say it. What could I do? I shrugged and let myself fall backwards into the pool. And later in the year, I was on the job. It was all routine for days. Then we got a call for a missing person, and we were to search the bottom of a large pond. 3 of us were going into the water, with support personnel above. The officer assigned to give me my on-the-job training checked my equipment and guidelines. He knew this was my first body search, and though I tried to look confident and like I wasn't nervous, he must have known my true feelings. He took me a few steps off to the side. "Look," he told me, "there are things they don't teach you in school. If there's a girl down there, we'll find her. Don't worry about the mud and lack of visibility. Just stick close to me and learn, my friend." He slapped me on the shoulder, and we were into the water. I was used to zero visibility. We had dived in our indoor pool with no lights on many times. Guidelines to the boats helped keep us oriented as to direction, and I kept one hand on my training officer's tank harness. I noticed after a while that he did not seem to be hugging the bottom, feeling around for arms and legs. Though I couldn't see, I had the distinct impression he was intentionally swimming a couple feet above the bottom, and I couldn't detect movement showing he was feeling around. I tried to feel around, though. My left hand and arm were constantly sweeping while I hung on tight with my right. I could tell he was running a good grid pattern, not missing any territory, covering an area thoroughly before moving to the next. What I didn't understand, unless I was just wrong, was why he would go back over the same area again several minutes later. Wasn't that a waste of time? And then I felt something. Was it a fish? The back of my hand hit something as I was waving it about. I reached back again, and then it happened. Something latched onto my left wrist with all its might. At first, I thought it was the third diver, playing a joke on me. Then, to my horror, I realized it was not. This was a hand, all right, but it was cold and hard and held me in a death grip. I panicked. I admit it. I let go of my training officer and flipped over on my back and started thrashing with my free arm and both legs. I lost my breathing apparatus. All I wanted to do is rid myself of this thing hanging on to me. And it did let go. Before I could break free to the top and get some air and scream, my training officer grabbed back onto me. He quickly found and shoved my regulator into my mouth. And he wouldn't let me go until I quit thrashing and trying to get topside. When I calmed down, he made me grab onto his harness again. Then he circled around until he found what had grabbed onto me, the dead woman's corpse, which wasn't on the bottom, but was floating a few feet above. Then we did our standard work, securing the body and getting her to the boat. Onshore, this is what he told me. That woman did NOT grab your wrist. We swam around, stirred things up, got her body to float up off the bottom so we could find her easier. Your wrist happened to hit her hand just right, and you snagged her. That's all. And then he told me the thing that no one talks about. He said, and the next time the same thing happens, you remember what I told you. And I have, 4 times now. Story 3. This event happened at my workplace, and while it might not sound scary to everyone, it really shook me up because, at the time, I was already dealing with strange paranormal occurrences in my own room. However, this story took place at the Domino's where I work, and where I still work today. Domino's, where I work, is located at the corner of a street next to a small gas station where the city bus stop is. I had heard rumors about the gas station being haunted by an old woman who had passed away there years ago, around the time the Domino's first opened. I didn't pay much attention to the rumors, though. It felt like my coworkers were just trying to spook me because I was new. Fast forward about 3 or 4 months, I became assistant manager, which meant I had the responsibility of opening and closing the store. One evening, I was working my usual shift, and my manager asked me to close up because of a family emergency. It was always eerie being the one to close, especially since the only other employees were 2 delivery drivers who were often out on runs, leaving me alone in the store. That night, there was a rush, and I was by myself for almost 2 hours. I started hearing noises coming from the freezer, so I went to check. Everything seemed fine at first, but a few minutes later, I heard the same noise. This time, when I went back, the ingredients had been moved. The beef and pepperoni had switched places. At first, I brushed it off, thinking maybe it was a mistake I hadn't noticed earlier. But things got worse. Not long after, I heard a girl's scream coming from the freezer. I rushed over, and the place was a mess. Ingredients were scattered all over the floor. Now, the rumors began creeping back into my mind, and I couldn't shake the fear building up inside me. As I was cleaning up the mess, I heard the front door open. Assuming one of my drivers had returned, I yelled out, "Hey! Watch the store while I take out the trash." Without looking, I grabbed the trash and headed outside. It was oddly chilly, especially for a summer night. I noticed a girl standing near the bus station, which was strange since it was around 1 a.m., and the buses had stopped running by midnight. As I got closer to her, I realized my driver wasn't back yet because his car wasn't in the lot, and when I looked through the window, I saw no one inside. I should have heard the door chime if anyone had entered or left, but there was only silence. I turned back to the girl, still standing there, and I called out, "Hey, the buses don't run this late. You need to leave." She didn't respond. I got closer, warning her again that if she didn't leave, I'd have to call the cops. Suddenly, I heard footsteps running towards me, and before I knew it, she was just 2 feet away, staring straight at me, not saying a word. That's when it hit me this wasn't just any girl. She was the one from the rumors, the one who had been haunting the gas station. And she was the same person whose scream I'd heard in the freezer earlier. Frozen with fear, I turned around and ran as fast as I could back to the store. Halfway there, I heard a car horn. One of the delivery drivers had finally returned, scaring the woman off. I don't know if this sounds scary to you, but for me, it was terrifying. The fact that, at the same time, I was being haunted by a woman in my own bedroom who looked just like the one I saw that night made it all the more real. I still work at that same Domino's, but after that experience, I will never close the store again. Story 4. When I was expecting my first son, my sisters threw me a baby shower at my in-laws' house. One of my friends from work, Angela, who is white, came to the shower. It was a typical baby shower games, food and gifts. The event ended without any issues, and everything seemed perfectly normal. The following Monday, I was at work having lunch with Angela, and we started chatting about the baby shower. She told me she had a great time and loved the food. Then, she mentioned something that caught me off guard. She said she was surprised that my mom understood English, even though she hadn't heard her speak any English during the entire event. I was confused and told her my mom wasn't at the baby shower. The only older woman there was my mother-in-law, and she doesn't understand any English. Angela seemed shocked and insisted that there had been another middle-aged Hmong woman at the shower. I told her again that the only older woman present was my mother-in-law, and she wasn't around 40-50 years old as Angela described. But Angela was sure. She described the woman, slim, with neck-length black hair, wearing a floral print shirt and a long skirt. She said the woman had sat near my 2 sisters-in-law, played games with them, and even got in line for food, smiling and interacting with everyone. Angela was certain this woman had been a part of the shower, the entire time cheering and clapping when I opened gifts, acting like any other guest. Her story sent chills down my spine. My in-laws' house had always felt strange to me. The room my husband and I stayed in was always freezing. No matter how warm the rest of the house was, even during California summers. I once had a dream where an elderly woman told me that the room was cold because she had died in it. I often woke up at 3:30 a.m. to prepare lunch for my husband, who left for work at 5 a.m. Every time I was alone in the kitchen, I could feel the hairs on my neck stand up. I was too afraid to look around, feeling like someone was watching me. So I would hum quietly to myself and hurry through my tasks. After we moved out, my brother-in-law and his wife moved into that room. One day, she randomly recorded a video on her phone while inside the room. When she looked back at the video, she noticed a dark figure in the footage. She couldn't figure out what it was, but it scared her enough that she immediately deleted the video. Thinking back to the baby shower, I couldn't recall any other woman being there with my sisters-in-law. It was just the 2 of them, and they were partnered up for the games. I asked my sister to check the photos she had taken during the event, hoping to see if this mysterious woman appeared in any of them. My sister said there was nothing unusual in the pictures, just some odd light spots here and there, but no woman matching Angela's description. I told my husband about what Angela had seen, and he mentioned it to my father-in-law.
His response sent another chill down my spine.
He calmly said, "Angela has never been to our house, so the lady let her see her. Angela wouldn't know that she wasn't human. We shouldn't worry about it. She isn't hurting us. Let her be, as she is letting us be. My in-laws still live in that house." According to my father-in-law, shamans aren't afraid of the supernatural because spirits have no power over them. Story 5. This story was told by my mom, but I'll be the narrator. Side note, I didn't experience any paranormal activity, but everyone else in the family did. It happened in 1991 at a big haunted house in Green Bay, Wisconsin. I'm not exactly sure where, but my parents bought one of those large, beautiful houses in a wealthy area. Only my mom, dad, grandma, dad's mom, my sister, and I lived there. My sister was 2, and I was just an infant. It all started after we moved in and got settled. Since there were so many rooms, I got my own room with a crib, and my sister had her own playroom. My mom, who was young and didn't work, would watch us while she went to school. My sister was the first to experience something strange. Being a kid, she would talk to herself and play alone in her playroom. One day, my mom was watching TV when she suddenly heard my sister running down the hallway. My sister rushed into the living room and sat next to her, breathing hard and wide-eyed like she'd seen a ghost. My mom asked what was wrong, but my sister didn't say a word. She was always quiet and kept to herself. After that, things seemed fine for a while. My aunt moved to town to be near us, and my grandma went to visit her one night. We all went except for my mom, who stayed home to finish homework. She was working in her room with just a desk lamp on, so it was pretty dark. Out of nowhere, she heard plates dropping in the kitchen, but none broke. The sound kept going, like when a plate rolls on its side. Then, when the noise finally stopped, another plate would drop. Scared, my mom decided to go to bed, pulling the covers over her head. Then she heard footsteps coming from the kitchen and moving slowly toward her bedroom door. The door creaked open, and the footsteps came closer to her bed. My mom was so terrified she held her breath. After about 30 seconds of silence, something yanked the cover off and slapped her. She said it felt like it nearly knocked the life out of her. She turned on the light, but no one was there. She stayed up all night with the lights on, waiting for everyone to return. When she heard a car pull up, she ran outside to meet them and told them what happened, but they didn't think much of it. That same night, while everyone was asleep, my grandma was the next target. She dreamed of an old woman in a long, old-fashioned dress with a large bun in her hair, wrinkled and aged. In the dream, the white lady told my grandma, "Get your family and leave my house now." My grandma replied, "No, you're dead. You need to move on." The lady suddenly screamed, "GTOUTNOW," and slapped my grandma, just as she had done to my mom. My grandma started screaming for my dad, and everyone woke up. She told my dad what had happened and confirmed that what my mom experienced was real. They all went to my aunt's house that night, without packing anything. A couple of weeks later, my dad and 3 friends went hunting and caught a few deer. My dad decided to use the basement of the house to skin them. As they worked, one of his friends asked, "Is the house really haunted?" My dad replied, "I don't know. That's what my mom and wife say. They keep seeing ghosts, but I've never experienced anything." Right after he said that, they heard loud stomping upstairs like someone angrily walking back and forth. My dad looked around, and all 3 of his friends were with him in the basement. Scared, they raced upstairs and out of the house, leaving the deer behind. My dad said each time the white lady stomped, dust would fall from the ceiling. Another side story about the house. My mom told me she always felt like she was being watched whenever she went into the basement, so she would hurry back upstairs. Creepy, right? I was too young to remember anything, but my sister does recall seeing a white lady in her playroom. I'm not sure if the house still exists in Green Bay, but my family truly believes it was haunted. Thanks for reading, and sorry, it's so long. Oh, and I almost forgot the most important part. The person who sold the house to my parents knew it was haunted. He knew the story of the lady who used to live there. She had lived in the house all her life and died there. Years later, the house was put up for sale, but the woman cherished her home so much that she haunted it to keep outsiders away. At one point, the house was a hotel, which explains the many bedrooms. The basement was once a bar and poker area, which also explains why my mom felt like she was being watched down there. Story 6. This story was told to me by a close friend. Apologies if it's a bit long. Some may find it scary, while others might not. My friend used to work at a sushi restaurant in Woodbury, Minnesota, called Akita. For those of you in the area, you probably know the place. There's a break room in the back where the employees go for lunch. One day, while my friend was on her lunch break, she accidentally dropped some food on the floor. Not thinking much of it, she threw it away and went on with her day. A few nights later, she came home around 2 a.m. Everyone was asleep, and she settled on the couch to unwind before bed. As she sat there, the notebooks on the coffee table began flipping through pages on their own. Then, she heard movement from the kitchen, like someone was touching the dishes on the drying rack. Scared, she decided to sleep under the shrine in her living room for the night. While lying there, wrapped in a blanket, she began hearing the sound of footsteps running around her and the shrine's small, quick steps, like those of a child. Days passed, and one evening while she was showering, something tugged at the shower curtain. Peeking around the edge, it seemed like a little girl was playing peekaboo with her. My friend hadn't told anyone about these strange occurrences yet. A month later, she and her parents took a trip to California to visit their grandparents. One afternoon, while cooking in the kitchen, she saw something move out of the corner of her eye. Startled, she accidentally spilled hot oil, burning her hand. As she bandaged the burn, her uncle approached and asked what had happened. She brushed it off as an accident, but her uncle pressed, sensing something was wrong. Finally, she confided in him that she believed something had been following her. She had even seen it in the house earlier, which caused her to get burned. Her uncle, who happened to be a shaman, smiled and said he had sensed the presence since they'd arrived. He prepared a small ceremony and began asking her questions about where she worked and what had been going on. When she told him about working at the restaurant, he asked if she had dropped any food recently. She admitted that she had only a few times. Her uncle revealed that the spirit following her was that of a little girl, around 8 to 10 years old. She had been following my friend because she was the only one who had fed her by dropping food on the ground. The girl's spirit wanted to be her friend. He also told her that this girl had been murdered long ago near the water fountain in the back of what is now Akita, before the restaurant and other buildings were constructed. She didn't mean any harm. She just wanted companionship. To help the spirit move on, her uncle advised her to take off her shoes and wear them backward, Raukau Pojain Tuksug, at the airport or when she returned home. This, he said, would confuse the spirit and prevent her from following my friend any further. My friend followed his instructions, and after that, the strange occurrences stopped. She continued working at Akita for several more years. This story happened some time ago, but the little girl's spirit remains lost. I hope she finds peace one day. Story 7. The Uber Driver. When my father passed away in August 2016, it was sudden and devastating. I was teaching abroad at the time, and the news hit me hard. Growing up, my dad and I had been close, but as I got older, our relationship became strained. He cheated on my mom multiple times, which eventually led to their divorce. Afterward, my siblings and I distanced ourselves from him. partly due to the trauma of intimate partner violence and the stigma from our paternal relatives, who gossiped about our mother being a divorced, hung woman. Anyone who's experienced grief knows how overwhelming it can be. One moment, you're fine, and the next, you're in tears. When you're grieving, your spirit is weakened, leaving you more vulnerable to bad energy or the spirit world. After my dad's funeral, I began hearing the kijay, a traditional home-reed pipe playing softly at night, along with distant weeping. At first, I dismissed it as a trick of the mind, assuming I was simply overwhelmed by sadness. But when my sisters and I all mentioned hearing the same thing, I knew something wasn't right. For a while, we all stayed together at my sister's apartment, which gave us some comfort. Each morning, we'd talk about hearing the kijay playing in the middle of the night. There was a sinister feeling attached to it, as if something dark was taunting us. One night, while sharing the guest room with one of my sisters, she suddenly woke me up. She whispered that she could feel someone else in the room, and she heard a breath. The room was pitch black, but I instantly felt the same evil presence. My heart raced, and the hair on my arms stood up. I pulled the blankets over us and told her to go back to sleep, though I was terrified myself. I didn't want to scare her even more by admitting that I felt it too. Whatever was in the room seemed to want us to acknowledge it, but I refused. I started silently chanting, angrily telling it to go away. Eventually, I fell asleep. Months later, after graduating with my bachelor's degree, I decided to treat myself to a solo night out. The stress of school, combined with grieving my dad, had taken a toll on me. Since I didn't have my driver's license, I took an Uber to the mall. I had dinner, watched a movie, and around 11 p.m., I ordered another Uber to head home. The driver, a middle-aged Hmong man, seemed friendly enough. We made small talk, and he told me about his kids. Then, out of nowhere, he asked, "Is anyone in your family a shaman?" I was caught off guard, but replied honestly, "No, but my family thinks it might be me or my oldest sister. I'm not sure, though. My dad passed away a few months ago, and ever since, my spirit has felt weak. I've had some supernatural experiences, but I just chalked it up to grief." There was a long pause, and I assumed the conversation was over. But then he said, "I ask because I can hear your plague your soul whispering in my ear." A chill ran down my spine. He continued, "I think you might become a shaman, but not in the traditional sense. You'll help people when they're sick and speak an ancient language. Was your dad's name Beher? And didn't he love soccer and coach at home tournaments?" I was stunned. He guessed my dad's name correctly. "Yes," I replied. The driver nodded. "Wow, I went to high school with your dad, but we lost touch. I'm sorry to hear he passed." I didn't know how to respond. It felt surreal that this man had known my father. He went on to tell me he was a shaman and offered to read my palm. By now, we were almost at my house. I remembered my grandma and mom warning me never to let just anyone read my palm. Some people might have ill intentions, using black magic or cursing you. I grew more anxious, my heart pounding as we neared my home. When he parked, he turned toward me, extending his hand. "I can read your palm now." Panicking, I opened the car door and quickly said, "No, I've changed my mind." He stared at me blankly for a moment, then smiled. "Okay, that's fine. Have a good night." I watched as he drove away, clutching my keys tightly. As I hurried to unlock the door, I felt a breeze and heard the distant sound of the key again, followed by a soft whistle. I froze for a second before rushing inside. Once safely in, I called my sister and told her what had happened. Whatever had whistled or played the keej didn't feel right. It felt like a warning. I later told my mom and uncle, who is a shaman, about the encounter. They reassured me not to dwell on it, but I can't shake the feeling that there's more to it. They suspect I might be a rising shaman, and they've warned me to always keep my guard up. Since I was a child, I've had supernatural experiences, but since my dad's passing, they've intensified. I often have dreams where spirits visit me, usually in a house made of dirt. The house is part of a grassy hill, almost like a grave. I recognize it every time. Story 8. The Dragon of 8th Street Park. It was sometime in the 90s at a park in Stockton, California. I can't recall the exact name, but we always called it 8th Street Park. It was tucked near the I-5 freeway, with a soccer field, restrooms, playgrounds, and a river that wound lazily along the top of a hill. It was the kind of place where people gathered on weekends to gamble, sell food, and let their families relax. It was a slice of life, simple, familiar, carefree. We used to go there often with my parents. Dad would gamble while Mom gossiped with her friends. The kids? We roamed free, without a worry, lost in our games. That particular day stands out in my memory. The sky was clear, the breeze gentle. The air smelled like roses opening, the kind of scent that makes you want to lay down, close your eyes, and let the world pass by. With my eyes closed, I could hear the hum of life children laughing, cars rolling past, and the soft clatter of dice hitting the ground. But nature had its own plans. An hour later, clouds drifted in, and the first drops of rain tapped gently on the ground. The sun retreated, and the atmosphere shifted. My peaceful moment shattered. I decided to climb the hill to look at the river. When I reached the top, the view was breathtaking. The river shimmered below, but something felt off. The water was rising, slow but steady, like how it creeps up when you slip into a bathtub. A few adults and other kids had gathered nearby, and despite the rain intensifying, I stayed put, my curiosity growing. Suddenly, one of the adults shouted, "Snake! Snake!" Instinctively, I glanced down at the ground, but there was no snake. Then I looked at the river. There, slithering down the water's surface, was an enormous snake, its body thick, powerful, and impossibly long. It moved fast, cutting through the current like it belonged there. The others scattered in panic, but I stood rooted to the spot, frozen by fear. Sitting on the snake's head was a woman. She was calm and standing tall. Slowly, she turned her gaze toward me. Her eyes locked onto mine, and though she said nothing aloud, I understood her perfectly. "Don't be afraid. I'm looking for someone." Then, just as quickly as she had appeared, the snake and the woman disappeared down the river, swallowed by the rushing water. My mom must have heard the commotion because she found me standing there on the hill. She grabbed my hand, her voice frantic. "Did you see something?" she asked. I shook my head and lied. "No." But then I whispered, "We shouldn't come back to this park for a while." About a week or two later, 3 kids drowned in that river. I never found out why or how, but I've never forgotten what the woman told me. Story 9. Soulmates Beyond the Grave. This is a story from something I experienced last year while living in my own apartment. In 2023, I moved out and lived 15 minutes away from my family. I was going through a rough patch, working 2 jobs back to back, reflecting on my life as a daughter, and struggling with other stressors. I didn't have much time for myself and barely went out. but I kept pushing through. One night, I had a dream that still lingers in my mind. I dreamt that I went to a party with 2 cousins I'm close with and some friends. In the dream, I felt the same sadness I carried in real life, but I masked it with a smile. While we were drinking, 2 Hmong guys showed up. One was about 5'8", slim, medium build, with short hair and shaved sides. The other was around 5'6", a bit heavier, with longer hair and a small mustache. They looked like they were in their mid-20s. Let's call the taller one Ku and the shorter one Teng. We hit it off, and I started hanging out with them regularly. We'd go out to eat, talk, and have fun. It felt like they had become a part of my life. Eventually, my cousins and I met up again at a house to plan another party. I brought Ku and Teng along, but when I mentioned them to my cousins, the conversation took a strange turn. Me, is it cool if Ku and Teng come to the party too? Cousin 1, who's that? Me, the guys who came last time. We partied with them, and you even hung out with them. Cousin 2, who are you talking about? We don't remember anyone like that. I pointed directly at Ku and Teng, who were standing right next to me. Me, these guys. How could you not remember? They're right here. My cousins exchanged confused glances. Cousin 1, who are you pointing at? We don't see anyone. I turned to Ku and Teng, apologizing for my cousin's weird behavior. That's when Ku said something that made my dream feel unnervingly real. He looked at me with a gentle expression and said, "It's okay. People don't remember us after a certain amount of time." Then he added something that shook me to my core. To be honest, I came here to take you. Teng is my cousin, and he's here to help me. But I've realized it's not your time yet. I felt a cold wave of shock. I suddenly knew what was happening, but before I could react, Ku said something even more heartbreaking. I love you. We are soulmates, but Teng and I died too early. I came to take you with me, but now I see that it's not your time. I'll let you live your life. Don't be sad. I woke up immediately, my heart racing. I didn't know whether to cry because of what he said or out of fear that I had almost been taken in my sleep alone in my apartment where no one would have known. Sometimes I still think about what Ku said. Even though I've struggled with depression, his words remind me that I have my family, my new husband, and a future worth living for. I remind myself not to stay out late or be alone when I'm feeling sad. I was lucky that night, and it's an experience I never want to repeat. I'm grateful Ku and Teng didn't take me, because if they had, I would have missed out on so much. My loving husband, my new family, and the opportunities that came after that dream. Story 10, the infamous basement of Golden Harvest. Hey everyone, I'd like to share an encounter of mine when I worked at Golden Harvest. For those who don't know, it's a home grocery store located on the east side of St. Paul, MN. I was employed there a few years back as an inventory stalker. It was about my second month when other employees started telling me about paranormal activities that supposedly happened in the store's basement, back when there weren't bathrooms upstairs. The stories ranged from hearing footsteps like high heels to seeing a little girl. Knowing me, I believe in ghosts, so I didn't mess with that kind of stuff. I tried my very best not to go down there unless I absolutely had to. But being a stalker, it was almost always necessary, unfortunately. Anyway, about another month passed after hearing those stories. On a normal day at work, I got my hands dirty and needed to wash them, along with my coworker, who needed to use the bathroom. But but the upstairs bathroom was occupied. We couldn't wait, so we decided to head downstairs. Me, let's go downstairs. I just need to wash my hands. Friend, no way. Me, what's wrong with you? I'll wait for you. Friend, okay, let's go. Taking the risk, we both headed downstairs. We were careful with every step we took. The staircase had about 20 steps or so, and you had to make a right into the long hallway to get to the bathrooms. Now, Golden Harvest doesn't have the best lighting down there. There weren't any lights, except in the hallway, and even that was dim. We reached the men's bathroom, which also had a dim light. My friend waited outside the bathroom as I quickly washed my hands. We swapped places, and before my friend closed the bathroom door, me, hurry up. Friend, yeah, I'll be quick. Closes doors. As soon as that door closed shut, it all started. The bathroom door was to my right. I was leaning against the wall behind me. The hallway we came from was also to my right. To my left was a pitch-black room we called the chicken coop. It didn't have solid walls, but had fenced walls like an actual chicken coop. And, just as the employees had told me, I heard footsteps. The sound came from my left, like it started right at the chicken coop door, which was open. The footsteps passed right by me and faded into the hallway, click-clack, click-clack. And you know how you can feel the presence when someone walks by. Yep, I felt that. By that time, I was already scared out of my mind. My body froze, and I became numb. The footsteps started again, but this time they were coming from farther inside the chicken coop. They came closer and closer to the door, and then stopped. I looked up but didn't see anything. Now I was seriously freaked out. I remembered what older folks always say, just act like you aren't scared or bothered by it. So that's exactly what I did. I acted like I wasn't hearing anything, and just stared at the ground in front of me. Then something even more terrifying happened, the sound of a chain being played with, like someone was yanking it back and forth. I thought to myself, oh no, there's a chain on the chicken coop door. The chicken coop was about 5 feet away from me, so the noise was loud. But again, I tried to ignore it. You can bet I was picturing a girl standing by the door playing with that chain, though. The noise lasted about 10 seconds, then it stopped. It felt like it was angry at me for not paying attention because the sound of the chain returned, but this time it was right next to my ear. It was super loud. All I could picture was that little girl next to me, yanking the chain close to my ear. I didn't dare to look. My friend finally opened the door, and everything stopped. It felt like something had released its hold on my body. All of this probably happened within 5 to 8 minutes, but it felt like hours. My friend and I just looked at each other, but didn't say a word. We just stared and walked right back upstairs. I later told him what had happened, and he replied, "Yeah, I heard the same thing outside the bathroom." After that, I worked there for 2 more years, but only went back down there about 5 more times. It was probably the scariest experience I've ever had. Another time, I was working the back room, crushing boxes with a machine. It was at night, and for those reading this who have worked at Golden Harvest, you know how packed it gets with boxes. I was minding my business, and as I reached down to grab a box, I quickly saw a face between a gap in the boxes. I jumped a little, and the face disappeared. I don't know if I was imagining things or not, but yeah, creepy stuff. A lot of my friends have experienced even scarier things there than I have, but those are their stories to tell. Anyone else with Golden Harvest paranormal activity stories? Story 11, my brother. This isn't a scary story, but it's something strange I experienced. My husband and I were staying with my mom for a few months so I could go back to school. We lived in an upstairs apartment with 2 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, one in my mom's room and one in the hallway. I remember it was the night before Thanksgiving. I had gotten home from school about an hour or 2 before my siblings, and my mom asked me to pack clothes for my brother and herself. They were leaving for Sacramento after she got off work to spend Thanksgiving there. I couldn't go because my husband was working late that night. As I busied myself gathering blankets and pillows, my sisters came home. I told them to pack their things while I went to my mom's room to use the bathroom. When I came out, I saw my brother sitting on his bed, looking sad. I started picking out clothes for him and asked, "What's wrong?" He didn't answer. I looked at him again and asked, "What's wrong?" He just looked down and shrugged, still silent. I thought he was upset about having to leave, so I continued packing. When I finished, he was still sitting there. As I walked out, I asked, "You're not coming?" He shook his head no. I went to the kitchen to make food, and after I finished cooking, I asked one of my sisters to go get our brother. She turned to me and said, "He's not home yet. Mom called earlier and said he's with his dad. She's going to pick him up after work." I froze. I had just been talking to him in his room. Confused, I told her what had happened. She looked at me like I was losing it and said, "Maybe you're just imagining things." But I knew what I saw. I had sat right next to him and spoken to him. Later that night, when my mom and brother finally got home, I asked him, "You were in your room earlier, right?" He looked at me, confused, and said no, I was with Dad. He picked me up from school. I wasn't scared, but I was definitely confused. After my mom and siblings left for Sacramento, the house didn't feel right. I had goosebumps all over, like someone was still there with me. I stayed up all night, waiting for my husband to come home from work. To this day, I don't know why I saw my brother or what he wanted. But later, my mom told me something chilling. She had had an abortion before my brother was born, and an old woman once told her that there was a little boy following her. He wanted to be born, and had chosen her to be his mother. Story 12. The Red Orb. This story takes place in the old days when houses in Japan still used paper walls and doors. A young businessman was traveling through a quiet town after a long, hard day of work. He thought he could make it home before nightfall, but darkness crept in faster than expected. Not wanting to turn back and waste time looking for shelter in town, he decided to press on, hoping to find a place to stay further down the road. Luckily, he spotted a faint light glimmering in the distance. He followed it off the road and came upon a small hut. He knocked on the door, and an elderly man greeted him. "Can I help you?" The old man asked. "Would you be so kind as to let me stay for the night?" "I'm willing to pay for a room," the young man said. "Nonsense," the old man replied. "I don't get many visitors out here. You're welcome to stay. Come on in." The old man served him food and showed him to a spare room. As they walked down the narrow hall, the young man noticed another room right next to his. Thanking the old man for his kindness, he entered his room and settled in. After blowing out the candle, he lay down to sleep. But before long, a soft melodic sound floated through the walls. It sounded like someone was singing. Curious, the young man crawled to the wall and wet his finger, poking a small hole through the thin rice paper. He peered through the hole and saw a beautiful woman, her long black hair cascading over one side of her face, dancing gracefully while singing softly. He pulled away from the wall, puzzled. Why hadn't the old man introduced them? He decided to take another look. This time, though, All he saw was a red glow, no woman, just an eerie, pulsating light. Confused, he convinced himself it must have been a dream and went back to bed. The next morning, the old man invited him to breakfast. As they sat together, the young man couldn't help but ask, "Who was the woman in the room next to mine last night?" She was singing and dancing. The old man's face grew pale. "There's no one in that room," he said quietly. "That was my daughter's room. Until she died. She was born with a disfigurement and could never find a suitor to marry her. She took her own life in that room." The young man's heart sank. What was her disfigurement? The old man looked down at the table before answering. She was born with one red eye. Story 13. The Possession. Has anyone experienced a real-life situation involving possession? I always thought that only happened in movies, but I was wrong. 5 years ago, my boyfriend had a friend named Tu, who was a shaman. He and his girlfriend lived with my boyfriend's brother and sister-in-law at the time. One evening, I received a call from the girlfriend, who insisted that my boyfriend and I come over immediately. She wouldn't explain why. I was out with friends, but I canceled my plans and went straight to their house. My boyfriend was already there when I arrived. As soon as I walked in, I saw Tu sitting on the sofa with his eyes closed, rocking back and forth. Not knowing what was happening, he suddenly stood up and tried to grab me with his eyes still closed. My boyfriend and his brother held him back and took him back to the sofa. I ran into the kitchen where the girlfriend and sister-in-law were, and I asked them what was going on. That's when they told me that Tu was possessed. Then Tu began saying, "Come here, little girl," and started to whistle. He followed it up with 1, 2, 3, 4. "I'm going to come get you," and tried to come toward me in the kitchen again. The girls and I got scared and ran into the bedroom. The girlfriend told me I should light 2 joss sticks and say that I had just arrived and hadn't done anything, asking why he was doing this to me. I was terrified, but decided to follow her advice. I left the bedroom, lit 2 joss sticks, and said what the girlfriend told me as quickly as I could. Just as I finished, Tu lunged for me, but instead caught the edge of the sofa and said in a deep voice, "Because your soul is mine." I ran back to the bedroom and slammed the door behind me. We girls stayed in the bedroom, waiting and trying to figure out what to do next. After about 5 minutes, it seemed like everything was back to normal. So we cautiously emerged from the bedroom and asked if Tu knew what had happened. He said it felt like he had just been sleeping. I then asked them what really went down, and here's how it started. Tu and his girlfriend had gotten into an argument before everything happened. He was sitting on the sofa when, out of nowhere, he dropped to the floor, lay on his back, and started pounding his heels back and forth, side to side. Then he stood up, grabbed a small blanket from the sofa, put it over his head, and started spinning in circles. After that, he took the blanket off and climbed back onto the sofa, tiptoeing along the edge without falling. The entire time, his eyes were closed, and he didn't say a word until I arrived. The sofa wasn't against the wall at all, and they insisted there was no way anyone could have tiptoed on the edge without falling. That was when my boyfriend arrived, and he and his brother had to hold Tu down on the sofa. I looked at the back of the sofa and noticed finger marks running down it, like how you can see the difference in color when you run your fingers across carpet. My boyfriend said Tu's strength was so immense that both of them could barely keep him restrained. That was my first and last experience with something like this. Thank you for always supporting the channel and welcoming its videos. Wishing you good health, and remember to subscribe to the channel to achieve 1,000 subscriptions.